Where do you live?
In the city.
Do you have a house?
Apartment.
Own or rent?
Rent.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
A man in a dirty bathrobe, a car that backfires like a shotgun, and a pancake the size of a small child's mattress. That is your first real introduction to Buck Russell. And somehow, from that very first moment, you already know this man is going to turn an entire household upside down. But what you never saw, what stayed hidden behind the camera, is just as wild as anything that happened in front of it. Stay until the end. I have a bonus fact that will change the way you watch that mail slot scene forever. Number 15. The original cut of this film was 3 hours long. Picture this, you sit down in a movie theater in August 1989, the lights go down, and the version of Uncle Buck that John Hughes originally assembled does not end for 3 full hours. That was the original cut. A sprawling, messy, deeply personal film that Hughes had to carve down to just 100 minutes for the studio release. A documentary released in early 2021 by Hats Off Entertainment explored what was left on the cutting room floor, including a 10-minute deleted scene where Buck hosts a gambling night inside the Russell household with his buddies and a pizza delivery man. They play charades, then musical chairs for money. Buck loses, refuses to pay, and gets chased around the house. The scene is pure John Candy chaos, and audiences never got to see it. Number 14. Over a dozen massive Hollywood stars were considered before John Candy. Close your eyes and imagine a different version of that opening scene. The beat-up 1957 Chevy Bel Air rolls up, the door creaks open, and instead of John Candy's enormous, warm, rumpled presence stepping out, it's Tom Cruise, or Jack Nicholson, or Robin Williams, because all of them were seriously considered for the role of Uncle Buck, along with Danny DeVito, Tom Hanks, John Travolta, Michael Keaton, George Wendt, Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, John Goodman, Ed O'Neill, and Joe Pesci. 14 names, 14 very different versions of this film that could have existed. In the end, it was John Hughes's existing friendship with Candy from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles that sealed the deal. And once you've seen Candy in that role, it becomes almost impossible to imagine any of those other names even coming close. Number 13. Winona Ryder turned down the role of Tia. Do you remember the moment Tia stands in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes sharp enough to cut glass, and tells Buck exactly what she thinks of him? That tension, that raw teenage fury, was the emotional engine of the entire film. John Hughes had one person in mind for that role first, Winona Ryder, fresh off her breakout performance in Beetlejuice. But Ryder had to turn it down. She was already committed to filming Heathers. Ali Sheedy, who Hughes had already worked with on The Breakfast Club, was also considered. The role ultimately went to a then unknown Jean Louisa Kelly in her very first feature film. And she brought something to Tia that felt completely real. Not polished, not Hollywood, just genuinely furious and genuinely wounded. Number 12. The entire film was shot inside a high school gymnasium. When you watch Buck walk through the hallways of that house, the staircase, the kitchen, the bedrooms, you might assume the crew found a real family home somewhere in the Chicago suburbs and simply moved in. But almost none of what you see was real. Every single interior set in Uncle Buck was built inside the gyms of New Trier High School in Northfield, Illinois, a school that had already closed down at the time. 3 gymnasiums were converted into full sound stages. The Russell family home, the elementary school hallway, the principal's office, the boys' bathroom, Buck's bedroom, all of it constructed from scratch on a gym floor. The same school had already appeared in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and 16 Candles. John Hughes clearly had a favorite building. Number 11. The film was supposed to be set in Missouri, but the weather ruined it. John Hughes built his entire career around Chicago, the city's neighborhoods, its winters, its specific kind of middle-class suburban anxiety. All of it runs through almost everything he ever made. But Uncle Buck was not originally written for Chicago. The production was set to begin in Missouri. Then January arrived, and Missouri did something no one expected. It turned unusually warm. A film that needed frozen driveways and gray winter skies suddenly had no winter to work with. The entire production was relocated to the Chicago area at the last minute, and the story was quietly rewritten to reflect that. What felt like a problem became the reason Uncle Buck looks and feels exactly like it belongs in that city. Number 10. John Candy secretly wrote his own lines on a piece of paper and hid it on his head. There is a scene near the middle of the film where young Miles, standing on the other side of a door, interrogates Buck through the mail slot. The questions come fast, delivered by a 7-year-old with the precision of a courtroom lawyer. To keep the pace sharp and help Macaulay Culkin fire through his lines without losing momentum, John Candy secretly wrote his own dialogue on a piece of paper and tucked it inside his hat. Every time Culkin glanced up through the slot, Candy's lines were right there above him. It was a small, practical act of generosity from a man who understood that a great scene is only great if everyone in it succeeds, including the child asking the questions. Number 9. John Candy went out the night before filming and got Hughes into serious trouble. One evening during production, John Candy slipped away from set with music supervisor Tarquin Gotch and spent the night at a local pub, meeting people, laughing, being exactly the kind of warm and magnetic presence that made everyone love him. The next morning, John Hughes switched on the radio and heard a caller describing his incredible night out with John Candy in vivid detail. Hughes was furious. Candy tried to argue that Buck was supposed to look rough and disheveled anyway. Hughes wasn't buying it. He canceled Candy's scenes for the entire day and sent him home to sleep. The irony is that Candy was probably right. Buck is supposed to look like a man who stayed out too late. He just shouldn't have actually done it the night before filming. Number 8. The idea for Home Alone was born on the set of Uncle Buck. Watch the scene where Miles interrogates Chanice through the mail slot. Miles, small and serious, peppering an adult with questions through a tiny rectangular opening. John Hughes was standing just off camera, watching Macaulay Culkin work, and something clicked. What would happen, Hughes began to wonder, if a child that sharp and that resourceful was left completely alone in a house? That question became Home Alone. 1 year later, that same child actor was defending the same kind of suburban Chicago home against 2 grown men trying to break in. And the whole world watched. The seed was planted right there, at that mail slot, during a film that most people think of as something else entirely. Number 7. John Candy was a real, protective presence for a young Macaulay Culkin off-camera. Years after the film wrapped, Macaulay Culkin opened up about what it was like to work alongside John Candy as a child. He described Candy as having a genuinely paternal energy on set, warm, attentive, and protective in a way that went beyond just being professional. Culkin has said that even before his career exploded with Home Alone, Candy seemed to quietly notice that things at home were not right. That Culkin's father was difficult, that the child in front of him needed someone steady. Candy never made a scene of it. He just showed up, treated the boy with kindness, and made sure he felt safe. In a strange way, the man who played his uncle on screen became something close to that in real life. Number 6. A young Anna Klumsky appears in the background of a classroom scene, in the scene where Maisie's teacher asks the class what they did that week. The moment where Maisie raises her hand and launches into a story that leaves the room completely silent. Look closely at the desk next to her. The little girl sitting there with long blonde hair, watching quietly, is Anna Klumsky. 2 years later, she would star in My Girl, one of the most emotionally devastating children's films of the entire decade. But in 1989, she was just a background face in a John Hughes classroom, completely unknown, sitting next to a kid named Maisie. Nobody knew then, nobody could have. Number 5. The sound of Buck's car backfiring was made from a real gunshot. Every time that enormous rusted 1957 Chevy Bel Air rattles down the street and lets out that massive, violent explosion of sound, that is not a car sound at all. The production team created the backfire effect by combining a real gunshot with a firecracker. The result is something that doesn't just sound like a broken car. It sounds like a small war. And that was entirely intentional. The car is Buck's character in metal form, oversized, embarrassing, dangerous to stand near, and somehow still moving. Every time it fires off that sound in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you understand exactly what kind of man has just arrived. Number 4. Laurie Metcalf was terrified on set, and John Candy noticed. Laurie Metcalf, who plays the aggressively lonely neighbor Marcy Dahlgren Frost, was still primarily known as a television actress from Roseanne when she arrived on the Uncle Buck set. She has spoken openly about how nervous she was. working on a film set with a comedic heavyweight who was famous for improvising, for going off script, for finding something unexpected in every single take. She was terrified of not keeping up. But Candy, she later said, seemed to sense it immediately. He slowed down in the moments she needed him to. He gave her space. He made sure she felt like a partner in the scene, rather than someone scrambling to survive it. The woman who came in, frightened, left with some of the funniest scenes in the film. Number 3. The film was adapted twice for television, and both times it failed badly. Uncle Buck hit theaters on August 16, 1989, opened at number 1, and eventually earned nearly $80 million worldwide. Almost immediately, someone decided it should be a TV show. A series aired in 1990 with a completely different cast and ran for 22 episodes before it was canceled. Then in 2016, it was tried again. A new cast, a new network, a new attempt to capture whatever it was that made the original work. That one lasted even less time before disappearing, because what made Uncle Buck impossible to replicate was not the premise, not the jokes, not the suburban Chicago setting. It was John Candy. You cannot cast around that. You can only miss it. Number 2. Buck's golf skills are referenced in Happy Gilmore. This one is small, but once you know it, you cannot unhear it. In Adam Sandler's 1996 comedy Happy Gilmore, there is a passing reference to Buck Russell's golfing ability, a quick blink and you miss it nod to a character from a film made 7 years earlier. It is the kind of detail that only exists because someone working on Happy Gilmore loved Uncle Buck enough to quietly slip it in, knowing that maybe one person in the audience would catch it, smile, and feel like they were in on something. John Hughes built a world across his films, and occasionally, the edges of that world touched in ways nobody announced out loud. Number 1. The real house still exists, and people still drive past it. Near the end of the film, after everything that has happened, the late nights, the confrontations, the pancakes, the genuine love that grew between Buck and those 3 children, the camera pulls back from a real house on a real street in Evanston, Illinois. 2602 Lincoln Street. It is still there. The exterior has barely changed. People drive past it. Some of them stop. Some of them take photographs. Because there is something about that house, ordinary, mid-century, sitting quietly in a neighborhood that looks exactly like hundreds of other neighborhoods, that holds something you cannot quite name. Not nostalgia exactly, something more specific than that. The memory of watching a man who seemed like a disaster turn out to be exactly what those children needed. And knowing that the man who played him is gone now. John Candy died in 1994 at 43 years old. He never got to see how long this film would last. Bonus: the Home Alone connection goes even deeper than you think. You already know that the idea for Home Alone came to John Hughes while watching Macaulay Culkin on the Uncle Buck set. But the connection doesn't stop there. Amy Madigan, who plays Buck's girlfriend Chanice, and Gabby Hoffman, who plays Little Maisie, appeared together the same year in Field of Dreams, as mother and daughter. John Candy himself went on to appear in Home Alone the following year, though he and Culkin never shared a single scene, and the high school used for Uncle Buck's interiors, New Trier, had already appeared in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and 16 Candles. John Hughes wasn't just making individual films, he was quietly building the same world over and over again, casting the same people, using the same streets, returning to the same city. Uncle Buck is not just a comedy about a lovable disaster of a man, it is one thread in something much larger, a portrait of a filmmaker who was always, in every film, trying to come home. If you felt something watching Buck stand in that doorway at the end, finally understanding what family means, drop a comment below and tell me which film you want me to go behind the scenes on next.